In a world of running inflation, film has become a pleasure for few. So how can we fight this? Well, the answer is Dehancer. That's a great pun. Hello there! My name is Gianmarco and welcome to my channel. A couple of weeks ago, the team of Dehancer got in touch with me asking if I could review the plugin. Now, I'm not sponsored by Dehancer, so they asked me to be specifically as truthful as possible whilst reviewing the plugin, but they did give me a discount code to share with all of you watching this video. The code is
Hello there.
and grants you a 10% discount on their website. Dehancer is a plugin for many photo and video editing software such as Lightroom, Photoshop and DaVinci, and allows you to edit your video or pictures in a way to emulate or simulate film. Before moving on to testing the plugin, I also have to say that the Dehancer plugin is also available on iOS. I'm quite sure it's not available on Play Store at the moment, but yeah, you can find it on the App Store and it's quite useful. You'll see on the screen right now a few tests that I've done. I think that this plugin can become extremely useful for people like me taking clips of holidays that they want them to use in their videos, and it helps you get a little bit closer to the final result. And this also applies for the pictures taken with your phone. I found myself many times taking pictures with my iPhone, and I have to say that being able to have a dedicated film simulation plugin on the phone or an app dedicated to film simulation, it's very useful because I tend to go for that look. It's basically implanted in my way of editing digital pictures nowadays. But let's move on to the actual test of the plugin. Since I'm not renowned for my editing skills, for my video editing skills, of course they gave me the choice to test the Dehancer plugin on all the software for which it is available. And of course I've chosen Lightroom because it's simply the software that I know how to use the most. So I think that the best way to test Dehancer is probably to just edit live one picture with you, and then I'll give you my overall opinion about the plugin, of course in this case just for Lightroom, and I'll also show you a couple additional results that I achieved. Now, I have spent the last 6 months between Italy, the UK and Japan, so I have a huge amount of pictures to edit, and I've decided to go with this picture, which is actually from, it should be from Dardoldo, or basically in the area of Dardoldo in the UK, because I don't want to spoil you the pictures that are taken in Japan. So let's just boot up Dehancer from Lightroom, which is quite simple. We just go into editing, and we decide to go with Dehancer. Edit. And here we are into Dehancer. Dehancer allows you also to emulate film stocks which have ceased to exist, such as, for example, Kodachrome, which we can find down here. Kodak Kodachrome 64 experimental. If you don't know, Kodachrome is one of the most popular film stocks. There is a lot of nostalgia around it, and the main reason is not only it has an incredible color palette, which is quite punchy and has a lot of contrast in my opinion, but it was also basically the first film stock which was mass-produced thanks to the subtraction method, color subtraction method, that allowed it to be mass-produced basically. One can also just go onto the film emulation that they prefer and just, select it. In my opinion, just by seeing some pictures online, because of course I never, for example, shot Kodachrome, I have to say, this is not too bad. But again, this is from my understanding of what Kodachrome should look like by simply seeing pictures online. What I notice is that it gets you the right amount probably of contrast, but at the same time, it's missing probably some vignetting, which I've seen is quite usual with Kodachrome. Again, I'm not sure if it's quite usual because of Kodachrome or because of the cameras that they used back then. But to me, it looks like Kodachrome had that kind of vignetting. But we can always, on the right side, edit it. And I have to say, when I tried the first time to edit a picture, I found it a little bit confusing. So, for example, Source has the rather basic corrections such as exposure, temperature and tint. But what I noticed the most is that when you use the cursor and just, make the correction that you want to make, it doesn't go 5 in 5. I don't know how to explain it properly, but yes, it doesn't go 5x5 basically. It allows you to go through all the spectrum, which to me is a problem, because not only it kind of chucks your computer. On my Mac, for example, my Mac is not too old, it's from 2019. When I use programs that have cursors like this one, for example, it's a bit of a problem. And although it gives you the maximum freedom of choosing the value, it's still a little bit confusing in my opinion. The other thing that I noticed is that the sequence of editing, let's call it in the proper way, recalls taking the picture and then developing it, then printing it. But the problem for me is that in a way I tend to get lost. I feel like some of these steps in the sequence are not in the right order. So for example, as you can see, the source is basically correcting the actual source, so the picture, the digital exposure, let's put it this way. But I don't really understand why vignetting is at the very bottom. And at the same time, for example, Emulation, I would probably keep it in the first section. This is just because if you like me, when you try to edit a picture and make it look like film, you try to emulate a film stock, you know that some film stocks have some specific level of vignetting and Emulation, and I feel like I wouldn't keep them on the very bottom of the sequence. This is just my opinion. Some people might just see this sequence and say, oh, it's perfectly fine. And of course, you can always remove the preview and just go back to what's the original picture, and you can understand better what you've done basically, and if you ruined the picture yet. So for example, let's move to the film developer. Here you can see the contrast, which I feel like saying this is the developing part of the film, so you can control the contrast in a way. For every time I usually try to emulate film, I tend to reduce the contrast a little bit, because it allows you to recall a little bit that incredible gamma for the exposure of film. So that's just a silly way to try to retrieve that sort of look. Now, film compression, third step that they offer. So you can choose the white point and also the tonal range. The problem for me is just that it's a little bit redundant, because when we get to expand, which I'm not sure why they call it expand, the fourth step of this editing sequence, we again get the black point and white point. From my understanding, we can control both of them just by using the tonal range. Instead, what I have to say, it's just brilliant in my opinion, and it's something that is missing in Lightroom, unless you want to bash your head onto the keyboard until you get a proper result. It's the print section, which is not exactly a print section, it's just the sharpening section, and I have to say this is brilliant. I tried it on various pictures. They offer you 4 profiles. This to me is fantastic, because as you know, when we move from scanning a film picture to actually printing the film picture, there's quite a difference. It gives you a little bit of exposure control and also the color density. Now here it says that the saturation is already at its limit, and I don't really understand why, so I will just leave it like that. The following step is the color head, but I feel that the color head should probably be before print, because I know that the printers for film prints, they do allow you to control, I think, both the primary and secondary colors, so you get the RGB and yellow, magenta and cyan. So maybe it's best to have it before print. I'm not really sure why it's after, but again, it's okay. The next step in the editing sequencing it's what has been basically the most problematic for me every time I tried to edit a digital picture and try to make it look like a film picture, and it is grain. The main problem with film grain is that digital grain, of course, is noise, so it's more like pixels changing color. The film grain is like a mosaic. So film grain is a proper chemical reaction. You should have this bubble-looking impression that remains after the development of the film because of, I believe, it's the silver. Now, if we go on to 101, it allows you to check properly, and I have to say, this doesn't look too bad as per grain, but I feel like maybe we could do a little bit better. I have to say, this is not too bad. I've seen worse. This is definitely better. Maybe here in the corners it kind of looks a little bit like digital grain, but I have to say this it's not too bad. If I look just at the sky, I feel somehow that I can tell that's fake grain in some way. But again, it's not too bad. It's really quite good. In the film grain section, you can choose whether it's film grain from a negative film stock or a positive. If I go on to negative, of course, the film grain is a little bit stronger. And for example, I would say that this is of course quite fake, in my opinion. Now the next step is halation. It's that sort of reddish bloom that you get from usually sources of light. Of course, in this picture you don't exactly have a source of light, but the reflection on the back of the car and also the entirety of the reflections on the car are basically a reflection of the sun, which is a proper source of light. So if I reduce the source limiter, you can see it basically picks up on the reflections from the car and it works pretty well. And it also gives you a mask mode so that you can control where the halation is showing. For example, my problem here is that the halation is also showing on the exhaust of the car. I don't think there should be any halation there. But again, this is not a proper source for halation. A different picture would probably work better. Finally, we move on to the last two steps, which are bloom and vignette. The bloom, as you can see, it's not exactly strong, but again, if I deselect the sequence, you can tell the difference, and I have to say it's quite nice. What I'm mostly interested now is the vignetting, because as I said, Kodachrome, for what I've seen online, has a lot of vignetting. So let's try to move a little bit things. Okay, this is not too bad. Aside from the elation, which should probably not be there with the Kodachrome, and maybe too much bloom, but I'm not sure, it's not too bad. So the final result is not too bad. I've also shown you a comparison with Fuji Velvia, because I've shot Fuji Velvia, so I know what it should look like, and also an example by simulating Ilford XP2. Overall, I think that Dehancer is quite impressive. It's probably the best film simulation plugin that I've ever used. I've used Filmlight Presets for Lightroom. I've also followed tutorials on YouTube of how to simulate film just by using Lightroom, and I have to say this is probably the best way to achieve a more film-like quality. Now, I would say that the HUD should probably be modified. There's plenty of already existing editing software for photography that have a different sequencing in the editing sequencing. So it's just, I feel that it should probably look a little bit more familiar in a way. The other possible problem is that as of now, the price for the software is probably too high, mostly because I think that there's still a few steps to be done. But again, if you think about the price of film rolls nowadays, and I have to say, in the past 6 months, although I have traveled a lot, I tried to not shoot as much film as I've done in the past, mostly because it's just very expensive. So Dehancer could be a proper alternative, or at least a way to save up by not having to buy film every day. If you're interested, the code
Hello there
is available. You can use it to get Dehancer for whichever editing software you usually use, and that's basically it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a like, comment and subscribe, and as always, enjoy your life.